My name is Sheri and this is my story. The first 10 years of my life was absolutely perfect. I was so happy, maybe a little sheltered, but I was the baby of the family, had two older brothers, parents that loved me, grandparents that was crazy about us, and lived in a beautiful two-story colonial home that my mom and daddy built by themselves. It was absolutely magnificent. Didn't have a problem, didn't have a worry in the world until November the 20th, 1969. I was 10 years old. That was the day that my mama was murdered, and my daddy was arrested and later convicted of that murder. It set into motion horrors of epic proportion for me in my life. The day of my mama's funeral, I remember coming into the church, and as we came in, people turned to look at us, and they were all crying and very upset. And we get to the front of the church, and there's this large, long box at the front of the church, and I didn't understand what that was. I sat down next to my daddy and my two brothers, and someone from behind me reached, tapped me on the shoulder, and whispered in my ear, "That's your mama in that casket there, sweetheart." And I thought, how weird was that? That didn't even make sense to me. When the service was over and we got ready to leave, there was policemen at the front doors of the Start Baptist Church. I didn't understand why there were policemen there. I know now that the reason that they were there was they had allowed him, my daddy, to attend the funeral of the woman that he had murdered just 3 days prior to that. I did not know until 35 years later, in fact, that my daddy had beat my mother to death. I was told from my daddy's family that it was my fault that my mama had died. I had left toys at the top landing of our staircase in our home, and my mama was bringing drinking glasses down from upstairs, taking them downstairs, and she had tripped over my toys, fell down the staircase, cutting her throat and lying at the foot of the staircase and bled to death. I was put into the home, into the care of my daddy's half-brother, my uncle. And even at 10 years old, I understood very quickly that this was not going to be a good thing for me. My grandmother would try to come get me periodically, which was my mother's mom. And being that I was on my dad's side of the family, she was deemed as the enemy now. So I wasn't allowed to see her very often. But when I was allowed to see her, she would take me to church. And I remember her telling me, just remember to say your prayers. Tell Jesus all about anything that's scaring you, and he's always with you. Sweetheart, he's always, always with you. Don't be afraid at night because he's there with you. So I did. I started praying with the innocence and the belief of a child. And every night crying for Jesus to come get me and take me back home. After living with my uncle for about a year and a half and being molested by him almost daily, it had gotten to the point where I was just angry and unmanageable, I guess. And he was going to put me in the Louisiana Baptist Children's Home because I had become uncontrollable. One day there was a knock at my door, and when my uncle answered the door, there was this man that was standing there that was in a naval uniform, and he looked so handsome and so strong. And when I saw his face, I knew who it was. I knew that was my brother. And he just kind of moved my uncle out of the way like that and stepped inside the house. And he looked at me and he said, "Pack your things, sweetheart. You're coming with me." He was in the Navy in California, so we prepared to make our trip back out to California to be with his wife and two young children. We get to California, and I meet my sister-in-law and meet the two little girls. And my sister-in-law tells me, not long after I arrived there, that her her prayers had been answered, that the solution to her problem had just been thrown into her lap. She told me that there was going to be things that was going to happen that was going to help her life, help her attitude, and if I helped her, she would help me. What no one knew, her secret, was that she was a drug addict, and I was to be the supplier for her drugs. At 12 years old, I was sold into child prostitution. 2 years, every night. And to me, they all look like zombies. And I often wondered if that's what I look like to them. But I know now it was just the drugs that they gave us so that we would be compliant and not fight them when they would try to do their abuses that they had in mind for us. Then the day actually came that my father showed up out of the blue. Didn't know anything about it. He shows up. I didn't know whether to be happy because I had been through so much in 4 years. I didn't know what to expect from him. He didn't seem like my daddy anymore. I had been told that he had been put into a hospital because he had been so sad that Mama had died, and carrying the guilt and the shame of me thinking that I had killed my own mother. I just assumed that he was angry with me, and that's why he didn't show up. I did not realize that, in fact, he had been convicted of manslaughter for her murder and had just gotten out of Angola prison. I was a little nervous. I didn't know him anymore, but I thought, this is my daddy. He's not going to ever let anything happen to me, and that was wonderful. That was great, because I had been betrayed so many times along the line that I wasn't a very trusting child anymore at all. The ultimate and final betrayal happened soon after we moved back home. Late one night, I was woke up by my father molesting me, and I was devastated. That was such a betrayal of trust. Sometimes I would think, how could God let these things happen to one little girl? I didn't understand what I had done that was so bad. So I didn't really understand what I had done that was so horrible that I would endure what I had to endure for the past 4 years. So at 15, I had my first son and chose to keep him and raise him. My daddy, not wanting to go through the shame of having an unmarried daughter, insisted that I marry the baby's father, which I did. At 17, I had my second son. Being that young, the marriage didn't last long. I mean, it just dissolved into nothing. So at 19, I met my second husband, married him, because I thought, maybe this is my way out. We got married, had my daughter, and for the next 20 years, we were in a seriously abusive situation, me and my 3 children. 1988, my grandmother passed away. That Sunday morning, I went to church because I felt like I needed my faith family for support. Went to the pastor and told the pastor my grandmother had passed away that day before that. And he asked me immediately what was her religion. I didn't understand the question or what that had to do with anything really, but he asked me what religion was she. And I told him Methodist. And immediately he was like, we need to pray for her so that her presence to God will be acceptable because she's Methodist. Here was my thought on that. If my grandmother didn't make it into heaven, it was impossible for me to make it. Then after 20 years, my second marriage dissolved. I married my best friend in the whole world. on our 10th anniversary, I remember telling him, thank you. The first 10 years of my life was so wonderful. The last 10 years of my life have been exceptional. In between those years, that dash, I had not been slapped, kicked, punched, spit on, any of the other horrors that had happened to me. Katie kept trying to get me to go. We to Kate, y'all know her as, to church. And I didn't want to tell her that I didn't like God. I didn't want to have to explain to her why I didn't like church or didn't want to go. I would just look at her and say, yeah, I'll, maybe one day we'll see. Then comes my daughter, Robin, and she starts bugging me about coming to church. Mom, please come to church with me. I don't want to go by myself. And I'm thinking, peer pressure, really? At my age? Oh my goodness. Came that Sunday, come through the doors, and everybody was so friendly. Everybody was, hello, how are you? And get a donut, and here's some coffee, want some hot chocolate. And everybody was just hugging everybody. It was like a family reunion. And me being the skeptic that I am, I was like, yeah, they just have to do this. I mean, they have to be nice. Get into the sanctuary. The music starts playing. It was awesome. Now, it wasn't for me then because I started crying. The music made me start crying. It was the song Cornerstone that just rocked my heart. And when the service was over, Pastor Joel had given the invitation and everything. And during that time, it scared me so bad, I left. I got up and I walked out. And I told Kurt that I would never come back to that church again. It was weird. It was too weird. That church made me cry, and I wasn't going back ever. Well, the next Sunday, I get up, and I never get up early on Sunday ever. And something told me, you need to get up and go. And I was like, what did you say? And Kurt was like, I didn't say anything. I said, you told me I needed to get up and go. And he said, no, I didn't. Somebody just told me to get up and go. Get into the sanctuary. Music starts again. I start crying, but this time it's a little bit different. I wasn't embarrassed. It was like a release, like the best hug from your daddy or your mama that you could imagine as a child. It was the safest, sweetest hug that I've ever felt in my life. And I know that that was the Holy Spirit now trying to soften my heart. While the music was going, I couldn't help but bounce around. I couldn't help but sway. And when the song, Amazing Grace, My Chains Are Gone, that was such a anthem for me because it was like my chains were gone. I know now that every night that God was sitting next to me on my bed, rocking me, trying to comfort a child that was so scared and so alone in this world, not knowing where her parents were, not knowing where her siblings were. It was very frightful. I also know that he was holding my hand. While I was being drugged and tortured by my sister-in-law's friends for their amusement and pleasure, I know that God was there whispering in my ear when I was being tied up and given drugs, telling me, you are valuable, you are worthy, and you're my child, and I love you. I know that now. And I think he also caught every tear that I cried from the time that my mama was murdered until present day. He still catches them. Forgiveness didn't come easy for me. For these people, including my daddy. Wait a minute. But I believe that God through Kurt and Pastor Joel and my children and my family, I was taught how to achieve the understanding of what forgiveness was. When I was on my knees in front of that cross, I felt him telling me, give up that shame, give up that guilt, because that was never your shame, that was never your guilt to carry. And it was such a release for me that I left everything at the foot of the cross. I was baptized at this little church right here, and going on now almost 3 years ago. This is the same little church that I swore that I'd never come back to. And this is the very church that I began my walk with God at. My life, even at 56 years old, I feel like God has got something spectacular lined up for me, and made me realize that it's never too late, you're never too old to be a good disciple of Jesus, be his servant, be his hands and feet for the least of these. My God pulled me out of great despair and misery that I thought that there was not going to be ever going to be an end to, ever. But I now know that my priorities are straight. I look forward instead of backward. I don't worry about the past anymore. That's not what defines me anymore. But here's the thing. I think the most awesome thing about God is his abundance of grace and forgiveness and mercy. It's just never ending. My name is Sheri McCabe, and this is my story.